outside. And Tori and I think, we do inspire each other. I come away from conversations with her inspired. I come away from her music inspired.
There's also something that I think the two of you share, which is you're both really quite fierce. And in terms of the work that that we're showing some of, like Sandman, I mean, it was deeply controversial when you think that someone like Kevin O'Neill was banned by the Comics Code Authority for crucifying an alien, like who cares? And then
in Kevin's defense, the Comics Code Authority did say that he was the only artist whose style was unacceptable. He could have drawn anything. And love.
It's fantastic. He's so proud of that. It should be. The controversial images that you had in your album line in there. I mean, you were really pushing the envelope as well. And that's something I really admired about you guys, and continue to admire about you. And it's something we're trying to really highlight in the show is that. And it slightly concerns me that I don't see an awful lot of that really kind of pushing or attempting to change the structure as much. And that's something that worries me, particularly in terms of spirituality, or even the discussion of spirituality doesn't seem to...
Well, that's funny you say that, not to interrupt you, dear brother. But the thing is, somebody was asking me before about the sexuality in the music industry. And hey, whatever gets you off, do you think? That's the way I say it. But you brought something that's very important to the table, which is not all of it. Sometimes it's not, many times it's not subversive. It's not as if the envelope, you just say, okay, put your hands on love. You're not saying anything. Now, I encourage everybody to express themselves the way they want to, but you're a bunch of artists sitting here. So what I think is important is you're talking about pushing the envelope. Now, that is about intention, isn't it? Because somebody, we were walking through the sextant downstairs. Now, what's interesting about this, though, is we were looking at it, weren't we? We were looking at things from the 18th century. And we were talking about a material that had to go to France and to get back in here. And when you think about some of the work that's downstairs and the intention behind it, and what it was causing people to do, and the art behind it, that's what's so fascinating. You're talking about pushing the envelope, and that's what I think we've been committed to do. And sometimes that is about spirituality, because it is talking about the heart. The heart's the most dangerous place. We've talked about this for years and years and years, that once you take your clothes off, that's the beginning. Now let's take the skin off. Now let's go underneath. Let's go into the cell structure, into the DNA. Let's talk about the thoughts that are there inside your being, that you don't even know are there because you don't allow them to speak. So this is, we'll talk about allowing our other selves, the other Neil, the other Tori, to tell us the story they want to talk about. And sometimes the most dangerous things we talk about are not the shocking things or the subversive things, but it's about the stuff that's where we feel vulnerable.
It's been so strange for me coming in from the Syrian refugee camps in Georgia, because I've never felt so vulnerable as by the end of it. There was a point where I went through these 3 days talking to refugees, realizing that the thing about Syrian refugees is they love Syria. They want to go back. This is their favorite place in the world. They think Syria is the best place. It's an awful lot nicer. It's an awful lot nicer than...
What were you doing?
I was there for the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, and mostly because they discovered that when I tweet and just amplified their message, they were getting more people coming in than from anywhere else. So they came to me and said, would you like to be an ambassador? Would you like to go out and just be a supporter, and we will show you what it's like on the ground? And I said, yes, absolutely.
Tell them what you saw. Tell them you were telling me this story, and I think they'll find it fascinating. You met somebody who works one way by day and then is a volunteer, and tell them you were there with the
Oh,
bandages.
it was, well, what was amazing for me over and over those 3 days, and I'll get
Yeah.
there. But yes, over those 3 days, what I kept experiencing was, on the one hand, deep despair at what human beings could do to other human beings, at the fragility of civilization, at the monstrous acts that people were capable of doing. The awfulness, after a while, just of the fact that when people would tell me about how their houses were blown up, one guy, his house was blown up, he wanted to he was on his motorbike, he saw the house blow up, he drove back to try and get his kids out of the rubble, and was shot in the back by a trainee sniper who was just practicing on shooting things. And other people had stories that were much, much worse. And whenever I would talk to these people, I'd say, well, who did this? Who blew up your house? Who shot you? Who cut off your cousin's head? Who did whatever the thing was? They'd say, we don't know. I began, well, was this Assad? Was this the rebels? Was this Woods group? We don't know. And you start to realize that there is this monstrousness, but in there with this monstrousness, over and over again, I was elated and buoyed and held up and held together and got through it by watching people doing wonderful things. The fact that they've thrown together a city of 100,000 refugees, this camp, it's 100,000 people, and they've just built another one that will take 130,000 in the desert. And and they're out there and they're doing it. This guy, Gaiman, who, lovely man who showed me pictures of his house in Syria that no longer exists because it was bombed, and works all day for one of the, as a sort of community mobilizer, comes home at the end of a long day's work, and goes out on his rounds as a volunteer nurse, visiting people who need medical attention but can't get out, the old people, shut-ins. And I went with him on his rounds, and I watched, as he, a good-looking 22-year-old young man who on his walk home trod on a landmine and has no foot left. And for the last 4 months, every 2 days, Iman's been changing his dressings. And then went to the tent where an 11-year-old girl, this beautiful 11-year-old girl who had, her mother was there, her uncle, her 5 sisters. Her father wasn't there because her father was killed in the same mortar attack that destroyed half her jaw and took out the bones in her upper arm. And Iman was there unpeeling, taking off the dressing and putting the cream on and dressing this mess that was once this child's jaw. And I look around and and I've been asking these guys, how do you cope? The UNHCR people, how do you see? Every single person has a story of hell. None of them wanted to leave. It got bad enough that they had to leave. The journey to Jordan was dangerous, nightmarish. People talked about passing chopped up body parts. They've been shooting at women and children crossing the border. It's all monstrous.
I would be fascinated, though, to see not only how this is going to affect your writing, because it will, but you telling this story to these creators here, how that will affect your process, because you're going to be open to, some of you already are. I wasn't open to this story because I didn't know it and I haven't exposed myself, but it will affect how I then investigate the story.
It's going to have a big, wider impact, isn't it?
I felt like I was doing some good because I tweeted yesterday morning. I can't believe it was only yesterday morning. Just did a short tweet about the shape I was in listening to some of these stories. An hour later, the BBC World Service are on the phone asking if they can interview me, and they do an interview and it goes out and it's heard by 70 million people. And I'm talking to them about the people that I followed through the registration process the day before, who were stunned, had not slept, had not eaten real food in a long time. They'd got to the point where they were eating cats and dogs and making soup from grass and tree leaves and things just to try and feed their children. You know, the nightmare that they went through.
So to be able to communicate that is very powerful.